Karen kept parking in my driveway, so I got her car towed twice. James had always been a patient man, but there was something about Karen's blatant disregard for his personal space that truly tested his limits. It started small, just an occasional inconvenience, a car sitting in his driveway when he came home from work. At first, he assumed it was an honest mistake, maybe a visitor of one of his neighbors who didn't realize they had parked in the wrong spot. But the problem didn't go away. Every few days, he would find Karen's car blocking his driveway, forcing him to either park on the street or squeeze into the tiny remaining space. Still, he tried to be reasonable. He knocked on her door the first couple of times, politely asking if she could please stop parking there. Karen, with her condescending smile and dismissive wave, acted as if he were being ridiculous. "Oh, relax, it's just a car. I'll move it later," she would say before shutting the door in his face. James didn't want to escalate things, so he tried to let it slide. But the pattern continued, and each time he confronted her, her attitude only worsened. The next time, she rolled her eyes and muttered under her breath about how some people are just so uptight about stupid things. That was when James realized this wasn't a mistake, it was a choice. Karen didn't just park in his driveway because she had nowhere else to go. She did it because she didn't care how it affected him. That realization made his blood boil. James decided he had to be firmer. The next time her car was blocking his driveway, he left a note on her windshield, explicitly stating that she was trespassing on his private property and that he would take action if she did it again. A day later, he found the note crumpled up and thrown onto his lawn. That was when his frustration turned into something deeper, a growing, simmering rage. Karen wasn't just ignoring him, she was mocking him. A few days later, James returned home late from work after an exhausting day, only to find her car in his driveway once again, this time parked diagonally, taking up the entire space. It was past midnight, and he had to park half a block away just to get home. Frustrated beyond belief, he rang Karen's doorbell, only for her to not answer at all. Lights were on in her house, so she was obviously home, but she was outright ignoring him. That night, James barely slept. He spent the whole time fuming, replaying every moment in his head, debating what his next move should be. When he woke up the next morning, he went out to check, and the car was still there. Karen had left it overnight. That was the moment he decided he wasn't going to take it anymore. He marched over and knocked on her door harder than ever before. When she finally opened it, she looked annoyed, not even apologetic. "You really need to relax," she scoffed, not even letting him speak. "It's just a driveway. It's not like you're using it right now." James clenched his fists. "That's not the point," he said, his voice controlled but firm. "I've asked you multiple times. You keep ignoring me." Karen shrugged, her smug smile making James want to scream. "Well, I'm in a rush. I'll move it later." Before he could argue, she slammed the door in his face. James stood there, shaking with frustration. It wasn't just about the car anymore. It was about respect. And Karen had none for him. That's when an idea crept into his mind, one that would finally make her listen. James had never wanted to be the kind of person who caused trouble for his neighbors, but Karen had pushed him past his breaking point. She had ignored his warnings, dismissed his frustration, and had treated his driveway like it was her personal parking space. After she slammed the door in his face that morning, he stood there for a long time, staring at her car, the anger bubbling inside him like a volcano ready to erupt. It wasn't just about inconvenience anymore, it was about principle. So he went inside, took out his phone, and searched for a 24-hour towing service. It took only a few minutes to find one, and within half an hour, a tow truck arrived in front of his house. The driver, a burly man with grease-stained hands and a no-nonsense attitude, stepped out of the truck and looked at James with a smirk. "Let me guess," the man said, tilting his cap. "Neighbor who thinks your driveway is theirs." James exhaled sharply, nodding. "Every damn day." The driver chuckled, shaking his head. "Man, I see this all the time. You wouldn't believe how many people think they can just park wherever they want." With practiced efficiency, the tow truck driver got to work, hooking Karen's car up to his truck. As James stood there watching, a rush of satisfaction flooded through him. For the first time in weeks, he felt like he was actually doing something about Karen's arrogance. He wasn't just complaining anymore, he was taking action. Within minutes, the car was lifted onto the tow truck, and just like that, it was gone. The driveway was his again. James felt a deep sense of relief as he walked back inside his house, but that relief was short-lived. A few hours later, as he was drinking his afternoon coffee, he heard furious banging on his front door. He already knew who it was. He took a deep breath, counted to 3, and opened the door. Karen stood there, her face red with rage, her hands clenched into fists. "Where is my Sar?" she shrieked. James had never seen someone so enraged over their own stupidity. He leaned against the doorframe, keeping his voice calm. "Oh, you mean the car that was illegally parked in my driveway?" "Yeah, I had it towed." Karen's mouth fell open in shock before twisting into an ugly snarl. "You had all right," she screamed, jabbing a finger in his chest. "That is my Sar." James didn't flinch. "And this is my driveway," he shot back. "I warned you, Karen. Multiple times. I told you to stop parking here. You ignored me. So I handled it." Karen was fuming. "Do you have any idea how much it's going to cost me to get it back?" she demanded. "Tow yards charge hundreds of dollars." James folded his arms. "Not my problem." Karen let out a frustrated shriek before pulling out her phone. "I'm calling the police." James raised an eyebrow, genuinely curious to see how this was going to play out. Calling the cops on herself? Now that was bold. He stepped aside and let her dial. Within 10 minutes, a patrol car pulled up and 2 officers stepped out. Karen launched into a dramatic tirade about how James had stolen her car and how he had no right to have it towed. The officers listened patiently, but when he turned to James, he was ready. He pulled out his phone and showed them the multiple text messages and notes he had left Karen, warning her to stop parking in his driveway. He even showed them the security footage from his doorbell camera, which captured every single conversation they'd had about it. The officers exchanged looks, and then one of them turned to Karen, crossing his arms. "Ma'am, this is private property. He had every legal right to tow your car." Karen's face turned pale. But I live next door. It's not like I parked in a stranger's driveway." The officers sighed. "That doesn't matter. If he told you not to park here, and you ignored him, that's on you. This isn't a police matter. You'll have to pay the tow yard to get your car back." James could practically see the moment Karen realized she had lost. Her shoulders slumped, her mouth opened and closed, and then, with a furious glare, she turned back to James. "You think you're so smart, don't you?" she spat. "You think this is funny?" James shrugged, completely unbothered. "No, but I do think it's fair." Karen let out a frustrated growl before storming off toward her house. James watched her go, feeling victorious. Finally, she had been forced to face the consequences of her actions. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that Karen wasn't done yet. She had learned nothing from the experience. In fact, she was about to make things even worse for herself. James had hoped that getting Karen's car towed would be the end of it. He had assumed that losing money, dealing with the police, and the embarrassment of being proven wrong would have been enough to teach her a lesson. But Karen was not the kind of person who learned lessons easily. If anything, she became worse. 2 days after the first tow, James noticed a subtle shift in her behavior. She wasn't just angry, she was vindictive. Every time he stepped outside, she would be there, glaring at him from her porch like a vulture waiting for an opportunity to strike. Whenever he walked to his car, she would mutter insults under her breath, calling him a petty little man or a pathetic loser with nothing better to do. James ignored it. He had won. He wasn't about to let her get under his skin. But then she upped the ante. It happened on a Monday morning. James had an important meeting at work, and he was running a little late. He grabbed his keys, stepped outside, and stopped dead in his tracks. There, in his driveway, was Karen's car. Again. But this time, she had parked it in the worst possible way. It wasn't just blocking him in, it was strategically positioned so he couldn't even squeeze past it. His driveway was completely sealed off. His stomach twisted in anger. He stormed up to her door and knocked so hard the frame rattled. No answer. He knocked again. Nothing. He knew she was home. He had seen her watching him through the window when he first stepped outside. She was doing this on purpose. She wanted revenge. She wanted to make him late. James pulled out his phone and called her number. Straight to voicemail. He gritted his teeth, feeling his blood pressure spike. This was beyond childish. It was spiteful. And James had no doubt in his mind. She was probably sitting inside, watching, waiting for him to snap. She wanted him to lose his temper. She wanted to push him to the breaking point. But she underestimated him. James didn't bother knocking again. He turned around, pulled out his phone, and dialed the tow company. Again. The operator recognized his number. Let me guess, same lady, same driveway? James exhaled through his nose, trying to contain his frustration. Yeah. But this time, she's doing it to be a jerk. The operator let out a low whistle. Man, some people just don't learn. We'll send a truck over right away. 15 minutes later, the tow truck pulled up. The driver, ***, the same one as before, ***, climbed out and let out a loud laugh. Unbelievable. She really parked here again. James nodded, crossing his arms. She thinks she's getting back at me. The driver smirked. Well, I guess we'll teach her another lesson, huh? The process was quick and ruthless. Within minutes, Karen's car was hooked up and lifted off the ground. James could barely suppress the satisfaction bubbling in his chest as he watched her plan backfire in real time. But this time, something was different. Karen burst out of her house like a lunatic. No, stop. Don't you dare, she screeched, running down her porch in a frenzy. She was barefoot, wearing a bathrobe, and flailing her arms like a madwoman. You can't tow it. This is illegal. This is harassment. The tow truck driver, clearly amused, climbed back into his vehicle and pulled away, taking her car with him. Karen lost it. She spun toward James, her face contorted in rage, and stormed toward him like she was about to attack. James held his ground. You did this to yourself, he said evenly. Karen's hands balled into fists. I'm calling the cops. You can't keep towing my car. James raised an eyebrow. Sure. Call them. And she did. Within minutes, a patrol car arrived. The same officers from before. The second they saw who had made the call, they exchanged tired glances. One of them sighed deeply and rubbed his temples. Ma'am, the officer started, pinching the bridge of his nose. What are you doing? Karen launched into a hysterical rant, flailing her arms and pointing at James. He's a menace. He's harassing me. He stole my car again. The officer held up a hand. Stop. Just stop. Karen's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The officer turned to James. Same situation as last time? James nodded. She blocked my driveway on purpose this time. I have security footage. The officer turned back to Karen, looking exhausted. Ma'am, I don't know what game you're playing, but this is the second time we've had to explain this to you. If you park in someone else's driveway, they have the right to tow you. That's not a crime. That's not harassment. That's called consequences. Karen looked like she had swallowed a lemon. Buddy, the officer cut her off. Enough. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to stop parking in this man's driveway. If you do it again, you won't just be dealing with a tow truck, you'll be dealing with us. Karen froze. The second officer, a woman who had been quiet up until now, spoke up. And just so you're aware, since this is the second time this has happened, the HOA is getting involved. Karen's face drained of color. The HOA? James smirked. That got her attention. The officer nodded. Yep. We already contacted them. They're aware of the situation, and if you continue to harass your neighbors, you could face fines or even legal action. Karen looked absolutely distraught. She stumbled backwards, speechless. Have a nice day, ma'am, the officer said dryly before getting back into the patrol car. Karen didn't say another word. She just turned around, walked back inside, and slammed her door shut. That was the last time Karen ever parked in James' driveway. A few months later, for sale sign appeared on her front lawn. James never spoke to her again. But every time he pulled into his driveway, he couldn't help but smile. Justice had been served.